How's everyone doing? Is everyone having a good time out there? Yeah, that's what I like to hear. There's around 40 million Americans without health insurance. Some liberals would say it's time for the government to take control of the health industry, but the free market has failed. The free market has not failed us, nor will it ever fail us. Government regulation to protect the consumer from harm being done in the marketplace is the true failure. The leftists that were lobbying for regulations in the progressive era got their regulations, and they did absolutely nothing to help us. The government has failed, but now according to them, the market has failed, and the government should not only control the healthcare industry, they should own it and handle the distribution. Who likes the idea of that? No. That's right, that's right. I often hear the argument that certain industries are too large for the free market to handle. But I find this argument to be a complete fallacy, because I can't name one government service that is better than a free market service. I would even argue that the free market should take over all of the government services and allow the consumers to make their own choices, not these politicians, bureaucrats, and lobbyists that steal our liberty each and every day. If we're going to have the government providing services, I would argue, why not let the government handle the smaller things, like, say, the pencil industry? But if the government screwed up the pencil industry, we would always have alternatives like pens or computers. But if the government screws up something as vital to our well-being, such as healthcare, we are all screwed. Yeah. I don't advocate the government nationalizing pencils because I like having a diverse choice in pencils, which you wouldn't have if the government controlled them. There's both economic and moral problems with socialized healthcare. I'll cover the economics points first. My biggest fear is that socialized medicine will end up like every government service out there, a complete and utter failure. But why do government services tend to fail? Why does our education system have low graduation rates? Why do 40,000 people a year die on our roads? And why do we have such efficiencies in free market goods and services like clothing and food? The reason for the success in the free market is direct consumer demand, competition, and little government oversight. The very reason for government failure is political demand and no profit and loss incentive. The profit and loss incentive means that businesses in a free market want to maximize their profits and minimize their losses, so they will best suit the consumer. Government services have no profit and loss incentive. They will stay in business whether or not they are providing you with a valuable service. If I own a shoe company and start producing shoes that only last 2 months, then chances are people will devalue the shoes that I'm producing and will choose alternatives. With government services, there are no alternatives. It's a corrosive monopoly that generates their money from taxation. If the government ruins the service, they are still in business. If the market messes up, they will tend to go bankrupt or figure out what's wrong with the problem. The second economic factor of government health care is something the Austrian school likes to call economic calculation problem. Under socialized medicine, the government sets how much money will be spent on health care each year and gets their money from either taxation or printing money from the Federal Reserve. The problem with the government setting the supply of medicine is that there might be more people demanding medicine than what they have in supply. This will create a shortage and government rationing will occur. You will be put on a waiting list under socialized medicine. In countries with socialized medicine, some might have to wait 12 weeks to have heart transplant surgery. Does anyone want to wait 12 weeks to have heart transplant surgery? That's right, that's right. Not only will they have a monopoly on the service of healthcare, they will also have a monopoly on deciding who has the right to live and die. The central planners controlling the healthcare industry cannot possibly allocate the funds like the free market can. The free market allocates the supply of goods based on consumer demand through the free pricing system. We have never seen a shortage with the free market. Shortages only occur when the government is in charge. See, under socialized medicine, it costs nothing to use the system. Government has a price control of 0 on the medicine that you obtain. If I set a cake out here and said it costs 0 to get the slice of cake and you can grab as much as you please, how long do you think the cake would last? Probably after the first 3 or 4 people, it's all going to be used up. This is a good theory on how the government will create shortages, rationing, and possibly worse, people dying while waiting for life-saving drugs. On the moral side of things, government-ran healthcare is simply immoral. Would it be morally right for me to break into your house and steal your money to pay for my health care? If your answer is no, then you should disagree with government-ran medicine. The government earns their money from gunpoint taxation. Taxation is theft, plain and simple. Some progressives would like to claim taxation is a voluntary payment to a public good, and it's not enforced at the point of a gun. Taxes are voluntary. Where can I get out of paying my taxes? Where's the format? I want to opt out of paying for my taxes. Yeah, right. You've seen what happens when people don't pay their taxes. First, the government will come and try to collect your payment that you owe. If you refuse, they will take you into prison. So, taxation is therefore not voluntary. It is coercive. You are forced into the government healthcare system. Sure, you might be able to choose a private company, but like private education, you have to pay for both public health care, even if you are not using it, and your private one. But it's for the public good. If public good means a service that everyone can commonly enjoy, wouldn't that make food a public good? So should the government socialize agriculture? That's why everyone has no food and no one goes hungry. But wait a minute. Didn't Joseph Stalin nationalize agriculture, and didn't millions of people starve to death? I believe the public good is a way to justify state intervention and a way for the powerful bureaucrats and politicians to earn a quick buck at the taxpayer's expense. We shouldn't be talking about the government owning the healthcare industry. We should be talking about why is healthcare so expensive. The reason is not the greed of the capitalist or the failure of the free market. It's the failure of progressive regulation and government accreditation groups. I'm going to be talking about the 3 reasons why healthcare is so expensive. The first reason is the Food and Drug Administration. 80% of our medical costs come from FDA regulations. These regulations are supposed to prevent drug companies from producing a drug that might cause harm to us. But the regulations in turn harm us more than drug companies would, because the price is so expensive. Drug companies are not out to harm you. They are out to provide you with a valuable service that can help you. If they don't serve you, the company will go out of business or you will go to a competitor. If we eliminated the FDA, we could drop prices overnight by 80%. This would allow everyone to nearly afford health care. The regulations also drop the drug development time from 4 years to 15 years. This puts a control on how fast drugs can be created. With the FDA being eliminated, many diverse, cheap, and life-saving drugs would be available on the free market. Some people die waiting for life-saving drugs that would be available on the free market if not for government regulations. The way I see it is, competing voluntary accreditation agencies would be the alternative solution to the Food and Drug Administration. If drug companies wanted to get their medicine approved by a certain accreditation agency to help their business, then they are welcome to it. This would be a voluntary way to make sure that drug companies are producing drugs that aren't harmful. The second reason for the expensive cost, and probably the most ignored, is the American Medical Association. The AMA originally started out as a voluntary watchdog group that gave certain medical schools, hospitals, and doctors their approval. But during the height of the progressive era, the big liberal era, a man by the name of Abraham Flexner released a false report on hospitals, doctors, and medical schools. Flexner had no history in any medical profession at all, so he had no credibility to release this report. After this propaganda report, every state used the AMA for licensing each doctor, hospital, and medical school to meet their licensing board approval. The idea of licensings in theory is a good idea, but licenses are so expensive it is nearly impossible for anyone with little money to start a hospital in their house, become a doctor, or start a private medical school. It literally prices people out of the so-called market. The AMA specializes in not protecting the consumer from dangerous hospitals or doctors. It specializes in limiting the supply of doctor, which in turn drives up the price of medical care. 75% of our hospital bills come from the doctor's wage. But there's such a limited supply of doctors and so many patients. The attempts by the state to stop harm from being done creates more harm and therefore causes those who cannot afford cheap and quality care to suffer more. The third reason for the high medical cost is the very idea of insurance companies providing health care for basic service. Insurance companies were subsidized, encouraged, and created by the government in the 50s due to the rising medical cost. The rising medical costs were created due to government regulation. When the government messes something up, they have an uncanny habit to try and save it, while creating an even worse mess. Insurance companies make your medical bill an agreement with a third party and not an agreement between two individuals, which is the way medicine was once handled and should be handled. Insurance companies pull both high and low risk together. It basically implies that some insurers pay more than others, but it's impossible to predict the future winners or losers in the insurance pool. They are picked randomly, and the distribution of income is unsystematic. If the winners and losers could be predicted systematically, the insurance company would be saved without government bailout. I would not want to pool my insurance with skydivers, snowboarders, smokers, or race car drivers because they are at high risk for injury. If something happened to a race car driver, my rates would go up in return due to the money shifted out of the pool. Due to legal restrictions on health care providers, they are not allowed to exclude the individual's risk as uninsurable. Yet again, more government setback on an industry that would be fairly efficient if only used for high risk. So basically, by dropping the regulations set in place by the government, the healthcare system would fall by 90% or more, and this does not include inflation. Under a truly free market healthcare system, nearly everyone could afford to get medical care. For those who cannot afford under this system, I'm sure there will be plenty of voluntary charities around to take up the cause. Deregulation and unleashing the free market can be a lifesaver for all of us, and it's a good way to stop the government from $2 trillion at something that is doomed to fail under their ownership. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and happy Independence Day. As James introduced me, my name is Joanna Simmons. I am the staff advisor for ETSU's Students of American Liberty. I would like to thank James Queen and the Northeast Tennessee Tea Party for allowing me to speak at this event. We come together to celebrate the creation and founding of our nation. Our nation was founded on the principles of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. For the past 233 years, our country has been the lamplight of liberty and freedom. We have been the shining city on a hill, an example to the world. We are living in exciting times. Everything around us is changing, and quickly. The size and scope of government is increasing at an alarming rate. We've seen the erosion of our civil liberties with the legislation such as the USA Patriot Act, the Military Commissions Act, and most recently, the bailouts. The politicians are selling us out. Instead of representing us, their constituents, they represent the lobbyists and the corporations. We've seen this time and time again, and we are seeing this now with the cap and trade bill. The American Clean Energy and Security Act of 2009, also known as the Waxman-Markey Climate Change Bill, is a 1,200-page bill that is the death knell for our economy and our country. This bill will give the federal government unprecedented control over every aspect of our lives. The goal of this cap and trade bill is to establish a national level of carbon dioxide emissions and sell pollution permits or carbon credits to industry, just as the Catholic Church used to sell indulgences to sinners. Ultimately, it gives the government the ability and the power to tax and control the very air you breathe. The Obama administration, along with leading Democrats, pushed this bill on the American people, saying that in these trying economic times, we need to create more jobs, and they need to be green jobs. This politicization of America's energy policy will lead to the loss of between 1.3 million to 2.2 million jobs in the next 3 years. Some figures even say that we could lose upwards of 7 million jobs. With the effective unemployment rate currently sitting at 18.7%, or over 30 million people searching for employment, can we really afford to lose any more? The administration pointed to Spain as a shining example of this type of progressive energy. The Spanish leaders said that green jobs are the jobs of the future, and that we need to look ahead and plan. As a common saying goes, hindsight is 20/20. Now, Spain is facing an unemployment rate of nearly 20%, where for every green job that is created, 2.2 real jobs are eliminated at the cost of over $800,000 per job. Is this the kind of country that we want to have?
Hell no.
No, I think not. Of course, the entire idea of cleaning the atmosphere of carbon dioxide seems a bit ridiculous when you realize that by historical levels, we are living in a carbon dioxide-starved environment, the global surface temperatures are dropping, and that key proponents of the man-made global warming theory, such as Al Gore, have been have been caught faking data and using outdated information to support their arguments. It has even been proven that the Arctic sea ice is expanding and that in reality sea levels aren't rising. But why let a good crisis go to waste? Why let actual science get in the way of a good scare story, especially when that scare story can be used to create a new trillion-dollar industry for the politicians and bankers? This bill will create a new national building code that supersedes all state codes. It will make a new class of federally funded green brigades with a mandate to perform house-to-house inspections to look for violations of the new green building code. In addition, these brigades will also be given the authority to impose civil penalties for code violations, including using the wrong light bulbs and not having energy-efficient windows or appliances. Is that the job of the government to illegally force itself into my house and mandate that I comply with their green rules? Absolutely not. This is nothing more than a money-making scheme, not an environmental protection solution. Cap and trade will bankrupt our country, and by capping our potential wealth earnings in any industry or any business that involves carbon emission, while simultaneously trading away our rights and our futures. Will we continue to rest on our laurels where our country falls apart?
No.
I say no. As concerned citizens, we must stand up to these politicians and bankers. We must resist their call to increase the size and scope of government. We must hold them accountable for every action and every bill that they vote on. We need to call, write, fax, and email our congressmen and senators telling them that we don't want this corrective tax. We should never be penalized for living our lives as we deem fit. In this time of great uncertainty and peril, we must be active and vigilant. We must spread the message of liberty, freedom, and the Constitution daily. We must be an example to others. In the end, let it not be said that we did nothing. Thank you.
I'm here today to talk to you about a country that I have lived in. This was a powerful country whose people enjoyed a stable way of life for decades. They thought that their way of life was the best on earth and that it would stay the same for as long as they could imagine. Their government had always kept them safe and provided for them. So when their country faced a crisis, they were confident that the government would take care of it and little would change. Unfortunately, they were wrong. The country to which I'm referring was the Soviet Union, where I was born. But if you might have thought for a second I was talking about this country, then you'll understand why I want to share this experience with you. My family came to the United States because we saw it as a land of freedom and opportunity, and I hope to see it remain this way. As we celebrate our nation's Independence Day, I think it's important to remember exactly why our founders fought to start a new country and the ideals with which they enshrined it. If we have strayed from the ideals found in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, I believe it is our duty as patriots to correct course rather than stand idly by as the ship of state careens off a cliff. I was born to a Russian family living in the Moldavian Soviet Socialist Republic a few years before the Soviet Union fell apart. During the 70s, my mother and her parents moved from Russia to Moldova, which is between Ukraine and Romania, when there were jobs available there. But most of what I can personally remember is the years of chaos after the collapse in the early 90s. I can remember standing in those lines that some of you may have heard about for hours in order to get bread and milk. For years, my family rarely had much to eat except for pasta because it was the cheapest food available. I can vividly recall the iron gates that my family had to put on every door because theft was such a rampant problem. We could not leave anything remotely valuable outside, else it would almost certainly not be there in the morning. Many people had to do anything they could to scrape by because unemployment was 18% and there were no jobs available. Those that weren't willing to steal would forage the countryside, picking fruits from abandoned orchards and selling them on the market. Others would make trips hundreds of miles to Turkey to find cheap goods that they could bring back and sell for a profit to feed their family. Of course, government still offered the same handouts as always, The only problem was that they continued to give out the same amount of money as always, which didn't do any good when the rate of inflation was in the hundreds. An unemployment check for 100 rubles may have fed your family a few years prior, but now you're lucky if it would buy you a single bottle of vodka. So government became worthless after the collapse, but there was no private charity to take its place because people had always relied on the public safety net. With that gone, families had to become closer and help each other get through the hard times. In general, the formerly omnipotent government became powerless and useless and only served to protect those that could afford to bribe the bureaucrats. The police were just as corrupt and prone to bribery, so people had to turn to the mafia for protection. In many respects, the mafia replaced the government as the strongest force around and could even get away with murder for a high enough bribe. As I've looked back on the chaos that I can remember, I've begun to wonder what things were like in the Soviet Union shortly before the collapse. Did people see that the end was near? With a collapse so devastating, surely it had to be obvious that it was coming, right? So I asked my mother what she remembers about the last few years of the USSR. I was surprised to learn that apparently no one saw the crash coming and no one had a chance to prepare for it. How could this be? Well, the Russian people were never as wealthy on average as people from America or Western Europe, but things were stable for a long time. As long as they could remember, men and women could always find a job and unemployment was officially 0%. Promising students could always go to college for free and receive a stipend to depend on. And like any good socialist nation, we had free universal health care. You had to give your doctor a token gift like some chocolates, but it was no big deal. Now, the socialists here always say, oh, the Soviet Union wasn't anything like what we want. Well, it's hard to tell exactly what socialists want, but as far as I can tell, full employment, free college, free health care, a universal safety net, and so on are ideas that socialists tend to support. But if all these public services were working fine only a few years before everything came down, obviously there was something wrong with the system. This became apparent in the 1980s when Gorbachev came in and the curtain of propaganda began to recede. People saw that even though they had all these government services, they were nowhere near as prosperous as people in the capitalist countries they had been taught to hate. In hindsight, once the truth came out, the end was inevitable. However, until it actually happened, people living there at the time never saw the collapse coming. This brings me to the point of why I'm telling you this story on Independence Day. As I see America undergoing economic turmoil, I'm concerned about its future. This country has been fortunate to be as stable and prosperous as it has for many decades, but nothing is guaranteed to last forever. I have lived to see one of the world's two strongest countries fall, and I don't want to see it happen to the other. Of course, the Soviet Union only lasted for less than 80 years because a communist empire is simply doomed for failure. As of today, America has been going strong for 233 years, and I strongly believe that the United States was able to rise from being a ragged group of former colonies to become the most wealthy and powerful nation on earth in the world due to the system of free enterprise enshrined in the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution. But the reason I am worried for the future of this country is that we have some people in charge that seem to lean more towards the ideas of Marx and Lenin than to those of Thomas Jefferson and James Madison. They're convinced that capitalism has failed, that free enterprise can't be trusted anymore. They say we need more regulations and more bureaucrats to make sure that everyone behaves. Apparently we have certain companies that can't be allowed to fail, so their incompetence is rewarded with billions of dollars in taxpayer money. And if a company is doing really badly, then we go and nationalize them, because we're supposed to believe that the people that bring us to DMV are the ones that really know how to run something efficiently. Socialists tend to criticize businesses that run for profit, but their alternative seems to be government-run agencies that operate at a loss. One of the main reasons that the Soviet economy collapsed is because the government always ran up huge deficits in order to operate all its social services and its military, and it paid for this by foreign borrowing and simply printing the money that it needed. Does that sound at all like our government? The result of the overspending and the loose monetary policy was hyperinflation, probably the worst thing that can happen to an economy and a society. A stable economy is based on the idea that people can work hard and save money and eventually invest it in something valuable. My grandfather saved for many years and had almost enough money in the bank to buy a car, which was very rare in the Soviet Union. Suddenly, the inflation hit, the government wouldn't let him take his money out of the bank, and all of his savings were worthless. Now I see the Congress and the Federal Reserve giving out trillions after trillions of dollars with no end in sight, and I wonder, how is this not going to destroy the dollar? The same way that these types of policies destroyed the ruble. Congress is running up the hugest budget deficits ever, passing stimulus after stimulus and promising more and more expensive programs such as socialized medicine. The current administration wants to give more power to the Federal Reserve, which has given out many more trillions than even the Congress. Do we really want a few central bankers planning our economy? Do we really want government-run medicine, government-run businesses, and government-run welfare? My last country had all these things, and they didn't do us any good when the government itself ran out of money and no longer functioned. The U.S. government is broke. Like the Soviet government, ours is financing all its numerous obligations through printing and borrowing. These policies led to the collapse of the Soviet economy, and I'm afraid that if we continue doing the same things here, we could see the same type of chaos that my family and I experienced in Moldova. We cannot come to rely so strongly on a central government that we are powerless without it. Rather than heading down the failed path to socialism, we need to get back to the constitutional system of free enterprise and limited government that made this nation great in the first place. Thank you.
Good job, Steve.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be back. It's good to see so many familiar faces, people I love, the people that come and talk to me every day about the things that concern them. It's been a beautiful day. It's another beautiful year in this great 233-year experiment, this great experiment in liberty, our constitutional republic. So take note of this day, ladies and gentlemen. Take note of the sun and the music and the patriotic pride with which we've spoken the words you've heard today. Take note of your families and your friends. As I've enjoyed all the activities today, I've had to pause and ask myself several times, will we be so fortunate next year? Will the next generation be so fortunate to have days like these? And those are my concerns. And that is what I worry about outside of my day-to-day responsibilities. And this is why I believe you're here, for your family and your friends and for that next generation. We truly are fortunate to be here, to have what freedoms we have left. Because those freedoms, you see, are dwindling by the day. As each and every administration, every branch of government seems to be legislating our country out of business, out of order, and out of time, while Americans are driven out of their homes, out of their jobs, and out of their minds. Because of this nonstop governmental meddling, there isn't much tangible left of the American dream. All that is left in the system is us. And all that is left of that beautiful idea, those revolutionary ideals of liberty, are those of us who believe in American independence. So many of the issues at hand, so many of the things I've wanted to talk about have already been covered today by several other speakers, from economics to cap and trade, medicinal freedom, and the meaning of the Constitution. I believe it's vitally important that we've had these speeches we've had today, especially now, especially today, because so often in America, we, the people, are left with limited options, limited by the debate broadcast across a corporately controlled media spectrum. Americans are not stupid. We are not apathetic, but we are highly misinformed and misled by agendas. For instance, let's take the issue of torture. There have been many times before in the past when the state has operated outside the rule of law, and these instances are best characterized by the Salem witch hunts, the internment camps for the Japanese, the communist blacklist, the loyalty oaths under Truman, and today's modern version, the never-ending, ever-mutating war on terror. Much like the new hate crimes legislation, if we allow people to be labeled extremists or terrorists, then we've taken away all of their human rights. They're then given over to a system of rules and procedures outside the rule of law. Today, much like those other times in the past, we see indefinite detention, secret facilities, mock show trials, denial of legal counsel, and worst of all, torture. That this is even part of the political debate is astounding. Worse still is that we are presented with the idea that torture can be rebranded and called enhanced interrogation. It's sickening. But this is the nature of politics in this country right now. This is how far we've gone from our history and our founding vision. For me to even say the words, the United States of America now tortures people, that fills me with dread, and it scares me to no end. Let alone the fact that there is support for this practice on both sides of the aisle. Do we look to the victims of 9/11 and stand upon their graves and shout, "We're torturing for you"? Would they be proud of us? Would the victims of 9/11 see this as justice? Is this really the way it's going to be in this country? I, for one, hope not. The use of torture has run its course through history, and it has been condemned every time by every generation. In 1764, Cesare Beccaria published Crimes and Punishment. This entire work is devoted to the issue of torture. Here in an excerpt from chapter 16, he methodically lays out the modern enlightened case against such practices. He calls them cruel and based upon the right to power, not of justice. He says, no man can be judged a criminal until he be found guilty, nor can society take from him the public protection until it have been proven that he has violated the conditions on which is granted. What right, then, but that of power, can authorize the punishment of a person, so long as there remains any doubt of his guilt? The dilemma is frequent, yet very simple. Either he is guilty or not guilty. If guilty, he should only suffer the punishment ordained by the law, and torture becomes useless, as his confession brought about by torture is unnecessary. If he be not guilty, you then have tortured the innocent, for in the eyes of the law, every man is innocent, whose crime has not been proven. Just like Beccaria, we must openly condemn the use of torture. And all we have to do is simply return to our principles, obey the rule of law, and abandon the notion of special laws for special crimes. And now, if you think this doesn't concern you, then I suggest you go home and read the Department of Homeland Security's Domestic Extremism Lexicon. Go ahead, get on the internet, Google it, DHS Lexicon. Now that the system is in place to detain and subjugate foreigners whenever they're labeled an extremist, what happens if this system is turned around on Americans? It's a heavy question with dire implications. But don't be fooled by believing that just because we live in the United States, that the horrors of Russia or Germany could not be visited upon us. The only safeguard for the people are they themselves. We, the people, are the only ones that can keep this government in check. And if we fail to do so, just as Steve Efremov earlier described his family's trials and tribulations in the Soviet Union as it spiraled out of control, we will be facing situations much worse than higher taxes. We need to remember something. As government becomes more exclusive, bringing in lobbyists, power brokers, and cronies to blindly follow their agenda, those governments become hypersensitive, wary of any opposition or criticism. I'm sure many of you have noticed how tightly controlled the press corps has become surrounding Barack Obama. As government progresses in such an unhealthy way, they grow dangerous, they grow desperate, and they grow radicalized. They grow weary of naysayers, and they begin to crack down. As recently reported by the American Civil Liberties Union, the Department of Homeland Security would tell you that we now fit the profile of extremists, and in their own words, low-level terrorists, for simply protesting, for doing our constitutional patriotic duty this beautiful July day by speaking out against them, for loving our families and our country so passionately. Now, did anyone here have to drive through a red light camera today? Yeah, I see. So did I. Department of Homeland Security funded cameras watch our cars on the streets. Protests and assemblies are monitored by the FBI. Bloggers and individual activists are being detained with their homes searched for anti-government materials. Police taser the elderly and the young alike. Tasering, as I call it, is merely violence and compliance via electrocution. Is this it, America? Is this really what we're leaving our kids? To echo the call to freedom presented by the Free State Project, I happily stand here and cry out to God, the great state motto of New Hampshire, a promise to God and my fellow man that I will live free or die, and that I will not wait to be given liberty, and I will work for it and get it myself, government or not.
Yeah! Yeah!
Now, you've heard a lot of talk today about policies that could get us back on track, about the philosophic shift that has to occur, about the belief in the individual over the state and the responsibility of living that way. Every one of us talks about what government should be, but right now, at this time, on this date, July 4, 2009, I want to establish what government is not. Number one, government is not God.
Yeah!
I do not spell G-O-D, G-O-V. You do not pray to the state. You do not worship the state. If the state gives you something, they've had to take it from someone else. God has no such tendency to steal.
Amen.
An American should be ashamed to ask the government for anything. If an American has to ask the government for something, that means only the government has created the inequity, the lack, or that need in the first place. Number two, government does not own you. You own yourself. This is the most basic fundamental truth of human liberty. The assumption that institutions can own others has led the human race through every type of slavery, every type of atrocity, and every type of government in history. Any type of personal tax, property tax, or income tax is a form of governmental control over your life, liberty, and property. The question is, who really owns your wealth, your land, your home, your sweat, yourself? The answer should be you, the individual. Number three, government is not the parent. Moms and dads, mamas and papas out there, you are the ones responsible. You are the caregivers, the educators, the moral providers, and the role models. That our government would so aggressively seek to undermine any one of these responsibilities shows just how little they actually care about you. Do not let your children be drafted. Do not let your children be recruited off into any type of national service agenda. Take part in your PTA and know exactly what your schools are teaching, and if you disagree with even one part of what they're being taught, have the courage to homeschool them or to send them to a better institution.
Yeah!
Number four, government does not know better than the people. This is another bogus idea, a fallacy that is being tossed around these days. It's the idea of the wise and all-knowing regulators. These czars, as they're being called, declare their knowledge of controlled markets, supply and demand, and cost controls to be superior to that of the free market itself. Central planning is the rejection of the free market and the open-armed embrace of socialism. It has another name. It's also known as economic fascism. Some say, I've heard many of you say today, we're becoming a socialist nation. However, I tend to disagree. But it's only a disagreement with word choice. We are not stepping towards fascism, aka National Socialism. We are not inching in the direction of socialism. It is already here. That train has come to town. To see exactly how our current economy mirrors that of World War II Germany, let's review the Third Reich's economic policies of the time, as summarized by Lew Rockwell in 2003. He states, Hitler went off the gold standard. He embarked on huge public works programs like the Autobahn. He protected industry from foreign competition, massively expanded credit, instituted jobs programs, bullied the private sector on prices and production decisions, vastly expanded the military, enforced capital controls, instituted family planning, penalized smoking, brought about national health care and unemployment insurance. He also imposed education standards and eventually ran huge deficits. The Nazi economic interventionist program was essential to the regime's rejection of the market economy and its embrace of socialism. Mind you now, the Germans did all of this in one generation. What the Germans did in one generation has taken our various administrations several. From the creation of the Federal Reserve in 1913 under Woodrow Wilson to the capital T trillions of dollars in stimulus, bailouts, and spending of George W. Bush and Barack H. Obama. But the facts remain. Central controlled economies of this caliber inevitably implode. Because of these executive vultures, the bones of our national economic prosperity have been picked clean. And as Mr. Rockwell ends his analysis, he's very careful to remind us, a government big enough and powerful enough to manipulate demand is big and powerful enough to violate people's civil liberties and attack their rights in every other way. And finally, number 5, government is not the answer. Government isn't precise, and it never will be. It's not simply a matter of, oh, we'll get the right people in, and I'll call my congressman. Government will always be government. You have to understand it's force. It is violence. That's it. That's all government is. Our job is to lessen the power and influence of government over our lives, not merely to nicely encourage them to stop beating us over the head with a club. The purpose of our government isn't to do what it's doing and more of it. It is to do less more of the time and be better at doing less. Almost everything that our government does, the market can do better. But what about the roads? What about the roads? They're horrible. Can you imagine America where critical roads don't ice over due to an internal warming system? Can you imagine cars so advanced we won't even need traffic lights with the traffic cameras that come along with them? But what about the schools? What about the schools? Private institutions crush public schools by every measure. If only we allowed the money to follow the child. If only we allowed more freedom and more choice and unleashed the market from its governmental chains. If we, as Americans, can believe in these 5 standards as a start, government isn't God. Government doesn't own you. Government's not the parent. Government doesn't know better. And that government is not the answer. If we believe in these and put them into practice, into our policies and our cultural philosophy, we would see a whole lot more liberty in our lifetime and could promise our children so much more. And much like the role of the historians, whose responsibility it is to carry the lessons of the past into the present to prepare us for the future, it is the role of the activists and the representatives to carry forward the will of the people at this time and help create policies that will benefit the coming generations. You have to work hard to live free, and unfortunately, so will our children. I've come to accept that as a precondition in this country, because independence is a fight. It is a fighting word. strung together with words like liberty, prosperity, and individualism, you were more than likely to be branded a dead man than a poet. Speakers of these empowering words like the sons and fathers, farmers, laborers, warriors, and statesmen of our own revolution, speakers of these empowering words have been killed in battle. They have been hunted for treason. They have been executed for merely believing in a future of freedom. This is the case again and again across the planet throughout all of time. History favors the strong, but the strong are not always right, nor do they always win. The God-given rights of mankind are not a given way of life and are always in jeopardy. They are not a promise easily kept, and they are never easily won back. However, history favors America, and history favors those who fight for a better future, not merely to preserve the current regime. A spirit committed to the teachings of liberty will never perish, for they are God's blessings. But by all measures, this great experiment, this 233-year triumph of the human spirit, has by all accounts run its course. But here lay America, her people, her children. We are misled by snakes, and we are in desperate need of common sense. Please, God, don't let us fall to the hands of petty tyrants after we've defeated so many. Everyone, all I really have to say about the 4th of July is this. Remember history and prepare your hearts and your families for the future. This evening, when you see the fireworks displays, when the night sky is lit with fire and the thunderous reports echo across the land, remember who has come before you, what they have given, and for you, if this night is different from any other, please ask yourself, what will I give? What will I give my children? And what will liberty mean in my lifetime? Happy Independence Day, America. Live free or die.